Okay.
Good start.
Okay, well, hi there. My name is Mike Bye. I'm an alcoholic. Through the grace of God and his gift to me at the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, lovingly and caringly delivered to be my people like you in rooms like this. I have not found it necessary or desirable to take a drink or a substitute drug, with the exception of caffeine, nicotine, and sugar, since October 7th, 1985, and for that I am eternally and profoundly grateful. That was a nice introduction. You forgot to mention how humble I am, but other than that, it was pretty good. I said they recorded me last night, and I had to sign papers for a release, and I thought, my God, what kind of Alcoholics Anonymous is this? But they're a little strange in Greensboro. Yeah, you know, they get too far north, and your brain starts to freeze. I have a home group. It's the Wadesboro group of Alcoholics Anonymous. Strangely enough, we meet in Wadesboro, North Carolina. And we do that on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays at 8 o'clock in the evening, and we do that Sunday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning for those people who want to cut church. I go to the 8 o'clock meeting, and then I go to work. I have a sponsor. He has a sponsor. He has a sponsor. He has a sponsor. I have an interesting sponsorship situation. My sponsor passed away this year in September. And I had done this before, and I asked a friend of mine in Wadesboro to be my sponsor. And I have an enormous amount of respect for his program and an enormous amount of respect for him as a human being. But he has considerably less sobriety than I do, which doesn't really matter because he probably works a better program than I do. The problem is that I sponsor his sponsor. There are just a few people who are sick enough to know why that's a problem. And for those of you who haven't figured that out, if you think about it real carefully, suppose I go to my sponsor with a real difficult problem, and he doesn't know what to tell me. And so he has to go to his sponsor. And it's such a difficult problem, he has to go to his sponsor, which is me. And then I wind up giving me advice, and we're all in trouble. I want to thank Matthew for asking me. I have to be honest. You know, I'm old, and I drank too much or did too much something, or Alzheimer's is setting in or something. And I was looking at my calendar back in end of November to see what I had to do in December, and I looked down, it said primary purpose group, and I thought, when did I say yes to them? And I thought, well, maybe I didn't. Maybe that somehow got on there, you know, because it's one of those things on the cell phone, and I don't know how that works, and sometimes it bounces around and stuff, and so I had Wallace come speak at Wadesboro last week or 2 weeks ago for our Christmas party, and I leaned over and I said, who's speaking in 2 weeks? And he said, got me. And I said, don't you read your newsletter? He said, no. And I said, well, I'll call Steve. And so I got around, and I was going to call Steve Moore to ask him if, I just broke your anonymity, I'm sorry. I called Steve to ask him if he had his newsletter around. And honest to God, I had the phone out, and I was getting ready to call Steve, and Matthew called me and said, we're on for Thursday, aren't we? And I said, oh, yeah, sure, right. No problem at all. And thank God he called, though, because he said, would you like to meet us for dinner at 5 o'clock? And I said, no, I got some friends, and they can't get off work, and they're coming with me. I said, we'll leave here about 6:30, be up there about 7:30. And he said, that'll be a little bit of a problem because it's a 7 o'clock meeting. So you're real lucky I'm here on time. Let's get me drunk real fast. I am the youngest child of an intensely alcoholic, intensely Southern, and intensely Irish family. I won't tell you what religion we are, but the words bingo spins chilly bumps up and down my spine. And I'm the youngest child, I'm the baby child, and I'm the only boy. I'm, in fact, the only grandson of my grandfather with the Bye last name. As a consequence, I grew up worshipped and adored. I mean, I wish I could sit here and tell you that I had this terrible childhood and everybody was awful to me, and that's how come I'm an alcoholic. That's not how come I'm an alcoholic. My family worshiped me. I'll tell my joke. You know, there's proof that Jesus is Irish. 3 proofs. First of all, he didn't leave home until he was 30. Second of all he did was hang around with 12 other guys. And lastly, he thought his mother was a virgin and she thought he was God. And that's what it's like being the boy in the Irish family. And that's what it was like for me. I was a little short, red-headed, freckled-faced, cute little kid with twinkly blue eyes. I mean, there was nothing in the world as good as me, according to those people. And they worshipped and adored me. And I mean, it just wasn't my parents and my grandparents, but my aunts and my uncles and my cousins and everybody just thought I was just cuter and all get out. And I grew up like that. I grew up literally like the little Prince of Connemara. And it was fairly clear to me growing up that if you were the little Prince of Connemara, that all these people expected someday you would take over the family dynasty. And as a consequence, I grew up absolutely petrified. Because I knew deep down in my heart that I did not have what it took to be king. I knew that I did not have what was necessary to do whatever these people wanted me to do. And I was scared to death. I can remember being 3-4 years old and being petrified, listening to people talk so that I could figure out what words to say so they would be impressed with me and think I was okay. And that fear has lasted all throughout my entire life. It really has. And the fear is primarily that you won't think that I'm as good as I want you to think I am. And as a consequence, that meant that I always had to try to be something more and something different and something better. When I grew up, when I was in school, I was a good student, not because I was smart, but because I wanted you to think I was smart. I was an athlete, not because I'm particularly coordinated, but I wanted you to think I was. And everything was done so that you wouldn't find out that deep down inside, I knew I was nothing. I knew I was absolutely worthless, totally incompetent, and totally incapable of doing anything. And that ruled my life until I was 13 years old. Absolutely terrified, covering it with arrogance and bravado. And that's a horrible way to live. You develop some skills. You become a chameleon. I have a skill I think most alcoholics have. I can walk into a room and in 5 minutes I can figure out what you want out of me and I can shoot it right back at you. Kind of like walking around with a mirror in front of your face. My friend Sean says that looks real good on the outside. Have you ever seen the back of a mirror? It's nothing but black. And that's what was going on inside of me. And that happened right up until I was 13 years old. I was 13, I took my first drink. It was an official drink. It was a rite of passage. It was given to me by my great uncle and my father in a bark shed outside of Whitmire, South Carolina. And it was crick liquor, homemade liquor that my great uncle had made up in the woods. And it almost killed me. I mean, I took the first sip of that stuff and I went, oh! I about died. And I promised right then and there I was never going to drink again. I also thought they were probably trying to kill me because they figured out I wasn't good enough to be king and they're going to get rid of me before anything bad happened. Stick me out in the woods somewhere or something, I don't know. In the intervening 10 minutes, as my father and uncle both took swigs off the bottle and chatted, something happened. There's a little tickle down the bottom of my tummy. I don't know if this works for the women, but for the guys, it's kind of like the first time you ever kissed a girl. You don't know what you did. You don't know if you did it right, but you can't wait to do it again and see what happens next. When the bottle got back to me, I changed my mind about never drinking again. And I poured as much of that down my stomach as I could. And I'm here to tell you, the magic happened. The skies opened, the trumpet sounded, The angels sang and the stars shone bright. And for the first time that I can remember in my entire life, I wasn't afraid. First time I can ever remember, I was okay. My friend Cliff from San Diego says that any good alcoholic after 10 minutes of drinking will get 8 minutes okay. And for the first time in my life, I was just okay. The way I compare it is that, you know that feeling when you go, ah, I got this. And for the first time in my life, I could say, ah, I got this. I was a man among men. I was a little prince of Connemara, and I snuck a look over at the king and thought, if you don't retire soon, I might just stage a coup, because I am ready, by God. For the next 25 years, I chased that feeling. I chased that feeling. I wanted to be okay so bad I couldn't see straight, and I wasn't okay. I was not okay unless I was drinking. It's the only thing that fixed me. It's the only thing that fixed me. And so I had to drink a lot so I could be okay, so I could be fixed, so I could talk to people, so I wasn't constantly in terror and fear, and so I could hide real good. You know, I did the same kind of stupid things that we all did. I was a traveling drunk and a blackout drunk. You know, so I woke up places, and my first 3 questions were always, who are you, where are we, and what in the hell are we doing here? You know, I've woken up in beds, felt a body next to mine, and prayed that prayer that everybody's prayed. You know, dear God, I don't care how old, how fat, how ugly, how awful, please God, just make it a woman. You know, that's... Well, y'all laugh, but you know, when we start drinking, all bets are off. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I did. I ran that course for a long, long time. In 1968, it was suggested that I go to Alcoholics Anonymous. It was suggested the way people suggest you go to Alcoholics. I mean, we suggest you might want to check that out. I was a student at Union Theological Seminary in Richmond, Virginia. And one night there was a party in my room, and they were making way too much noise, and I decided I needed to get some sleep. And so I took my blanket and my pillow and my skivvies, and I went and sacked out in the doorway to the chapel. I didn't quite wake up in time the next morning. Not a good thing. Actually, what happened was I was there, and I was kind of curled up, and evidently the blanket was over my head. And seminarian had come to chapel, and he shook me, and he had mistaken me for a homeless guy. He said, hey, buddy, if you need a place to stay, we got some empty rooms in the dorm. And I sort of rolled over, and he said, oh, God, it's Mike. Go put some clothes on. The next day, that afternoon, I was invited into the office of the president, where he suggested I might want to go to AA, because he thought that, you know, I drank a little bit more than the other seminarians, and I drank a little bit more often than the other seminarians. And when I drank a little bit more and a little bit more often, I acted a little more bizarrely than the other seminarians. And, you know, I wanted to be in seminary real bad because it was in the middle of Vietnam. And so I went to a meeting at Alcoholics Anonymous the next week. I did what any good drunk would do. I found a meeting across town in case I ran into anybody I knew. And I got that Wednesday evening, I got in the car and I drove to 7-Eleven. I got a 6-pack of beer because there's 3 beers there and 3 beers back. And I went to my first meeting at Alcoholics Anonymous. And I got there, and you all were very kind and very polite and very nice people, and shook my hand and patted me on the back. And he asked me why I was there. And I told him, I said, you know, that I was a student at Union Theological Seminary, and they had suggested that I come to Alcoholics Anonymous in case I ever ran into anybody with a drinking problem in one of my parishes. For some reason, I don't think they bought that, and it could have been the beer on my breath, but somebody, one of the guys did point out that he said, Mike, we have a God-given program. And I said, yes, I know that. And he said, we have 12 God-given steps that can perform miracles in people's lives. And I said, I know that. And he said, but we find they work a whole lot better if you don't drink. And that was good because I could get a resentment. I didn't have to go back. But I learned something really important there. I learned that if you get yourself in trouble, particularly around your drinking or around anything, if you pretend to be an alcoholic and go to Alcoholics Anonymous. Everybody will get off your back. All you got to do is you got to go in and say, well, I'm sorry, I'm an alcoholic. I'm going to Alcoholics. I see I got a white chip here. And everybody just backs off of me. Oh, wait, that's really wonderful. That's great. And they forget all that silly, stupid stuff you did. And you go there for a couple of times, you pretend to be an alcoholic, and I would go and I'd pretend to be an alcoholic, and I'd pretend to get a sponsor, and I'd pretend to work steps, and then I'd go out and pretend to drink. And it happened over and over and over and over and over again, and I kept going, I got a white chip. I had an uncle who did that once to another uncle, because the reason I can say everybody in my family are alcoholics is most of them, almost all of them, have wound up here for varying lengths of time. Some of them died sober, and some of them didn't quite make it that long. And I'm sitting with my father and my two uncles in Myrtle Beach, and one of them pulls in pocket and says, hey, this is Uncle George. Shows Uncle Joe, I got a white chip. And Joe isn't impressed enough, and he sort of gets up and says, I got a white chip. And Joe turns to George and says, talking about my father, he said, oh, that's fine. Buster's got like 40 white chips upstairs. Anybody can get a white chip. It's the truth. Anybody can get a white chip. I got a whole bunch of them. 30, 35 when I got sober. Sitting in my desk drawer. And I'd pick up a white chip, pretend to be an alcoholic, get everybody off my back. I don't know why I put them in the top drawer of my dresser, but I did. And there they sat. Carried a copy of the Big Book around. Never opened it. Didn't have the spine broken on the sucker. If you'd opened it, I had a second edition of the Big Book that if you opened it, it would crack like a brand new one. Because I didn't do the deal. All I was here for was to get out of trouble. And that worked fairly well for about 17 years. And on October 7th, 1985, I was ushered into the office of the Bishop of the Diocese of Maryland, where I was a priest in a little town called Mayo. I had been summoned there. I knew there were only two reasons that I would be summoned there. One was to congratulate me on the outstanding job I was doing as the vicar of the parish. The other was that there was some thorny theological problem threatening the Western civilization that only a brilliant mind like mine could help them figure out. There was a third possibility I hadn't even counted on. The minute I walked in the door, I knew what the third possibility was, because I saw two of the three Johnson Institute certified alcohol interventionists in the Diocese of Maryland sitting there. And the reason I knew that they were two of the three Johnson Institute certified alcohol interventionists of the Diocese of Maryland was I was the third Johnson Institute certified alcohol interventionist. There are lots of people who I helped get sober while I was drunk. And I knew how this goes. Now, this is what my disease is like. This is what my disease is like. I walk in that room. Now, I have done 30 or 40 interventions. And I know the deal. I know the minute I walk into that room, there is a bed in a rehab somewhere, and my butt is going to be in it because it's 9 o'clock in the morning by noon. And I'm going to negotiate. I'm going to negotiate. Well, if you guys think I've been drinking too much, I guess I could cut back. They laughed so hard they almost wet themselves when I said that. And I said, well, I guess I could stop. And I said, well, okay. If you're really that serious about it, I'll go back to A&A. He said, no. I said, what? He said, you're going back to rehab one more time. And the bishop looked at me and he said, here's the deal. You can get in the car and go to rehab. Or you can leave the keys to your house, the keys to your car, your checkbook, your credit card, and your collar on my desk. And leave. And don't ever come back. And if you don't use us for a reference, because we'll tell them you're nothing but a damn drunk and not to hire you. And it was 11 o'clock in the morning when he said that. And I'd had my last drink at 7:15. And if you're my kind of drunk, if you had a drink at 7:15, it was now pretty close to 11. there was that feeling down in the bottom of your stomach that you were about to turn into a human vibrator if you didn't get something to fix you. And I didn't have any money. But I've been around AA long enough to know that if you take somebody to the dry out farm, you got to stop and get them a drink. And so I figured this out in my head. If I say yes, I'll get in the car and they'll have to stop and get me a drink and I'll be okay. And then I'll get to the dry out farm, and in a relatively short time, I can convince these people that at the dry out farm that these people are well-meaning but terribly misinformed people and I'm not really an alcoholic, and they'll let me out. 36 days later in a 28-day program, I was allowed to come home. And my wife picked me up, and the first thing I said to her was, "You don't think I'm really an alcoholic?" And she claims that she said I said it in the kitchen. I know I said it in the car, and I remember her response was, "Just get out of the car and stay there. Don't ever come. Don't leave that place because you'll get drunk again." I don't know what was the difference between that one and any other one that I went to. I do know the one thing that happened while I was at that rehab was that the people of Alcoholics Anonymous in Annapolis, Maryland, had a meeting, and the topic of the meeting is, what the hell are we going to do with Mike? And some of them were in my parish, and some of them even worked for me. And they were pretty much sick and tired of me stealing their white chips. And what they did was they found me a sponsor. They found me the meanest, nastiest, ugliest, vilest human being in an AA in Annapolis, Maryland, and turned him into my sponsor. And I don't know who they were trying to punish, but they got both of us. And his name was Bob. And I called him from the rehab because they wouldn't let me out if I didn't call. And I figured I'd call him and just that would be it. And the phone call didn't go well. He finally figured out who I was, and his comment was, "Are you that damn priest they stuck me with?" Which, makes you feel real welcome in AA. And the last thing he said was, "I'll pick you up at 7 o'clock. I said, "When are you getting out?" I said, "Thursday." He said, "I'll pick you up at 7 o'clock, and we'll go to the Birdsville meeting." I said, "Well, Bob, the Birdsville meeting is only 5 minutes from my house." He said, "That's right, I'll pick you up at 7 o'clock, click." Now this was not part of the plan. The plan was, okay, go pick up a white chip, pretend to be an alcoholic, get everybody off your back, go back and live your life. 7 o'clock that evening, the door opened. There was a knock on the door. I opened the door, and there was my sponsor. Bob T. stood 5'4", 6 inches tall. He weighed 220 pounds. There was not an ounce of fat on him. He carried the hoses for the fire department. He had biceps the size of my thighs. He had slick back hair, bad dental work, and tattoos head to foot. Now, I know about sponsorship in AA, and I know you got to find somebody you can relate to, somebody of similar experience and background. And obviously, these people in Alcoholics Anonymous were pulling some kind of stunt with me, because this was not one of my kind of drunks, by God. He was an 11th grade dropout. I have degrees from all sorts of prestigious universities. He was a fireman. I was a trained, accredited priest in the Episcopal Church. And he was my sponsor. He looked at me and said, "Get in the car." And I said, "Don't you want to meet the family?" He said, "I'll talk to them when you're not around." Didn't make me very happy. He said, "Get in the car." I walked out. In my driveway this is 1985, was a 1967 blue, well, that part that wasn't Bondo and primer was blue, Mercury automobile. I went around to the passenger seat, passenger side, tried to get in, door wouldn't open. Any decent human being let you crawl across the driver's side, not my sponsor. You came in through the window. I said, "I can't get in." He said, "Climb in through the window." I said, "Well, I don't know, like you've never climbed in through the window of a car before. Get the hell in there." I got in, I sat down, he started the car, and I found that the most interesting part of his vehicle was that the passenger seat was not attached to the body of the car. Which meant when he went backwards, I went forwards, and when he went forwards, I went backwards. Now, I got to tell you something. I haven't drinking 36 days. I am on my way to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting with a guy with tattoos in a car that'll kill you. I was not happy to be here. I did not come to this program voluntarily. I was drafted. Nobody asked me if I wanted to be here. We got to the meeting at 7:05, just like I told him we would. We beat the damn coffee makers there, for God's sakes. Sitting in the dark, in a parking lot, in a church, waiting for somebody to show up and unlock the joint. And we talked. Well, he talked, I tried to talk. He could care less what I had to say. I tried to point out that I was working on my 4th step. And he turned to me and said, "Not anymore." I said, "I beg your pardon?" He said, "Not anymore." I said, "I beg your pardon." He said, "I'm your sponsor. You're not working on your 4th step anymore." I said, "Well, just what the hell am I doing?" He said, "You're working on step 1A. I said, "What, powerlessness?" He said, "No, step 1, that's step 1. This is step 1A. It's the one that comes before that." I said, "Well, what step's that?" He said, "Get in the car." That's the step I worked on for 3 months. Get in the car every night. Get in the car. I had a driver's license. I was a priest. They wouldn't arrest me. I've been carried home by the police a lot, but, I had a car, a nicer car than him. I volunteered to drive. "No, I'm driving." 2 weeks after he started picking me up, I bolted that damn passenger seat to the body of his car while he was at work. I showed up, his wife said, "What are you doing here?" I had a friend of mine who was also one of his pigeons. I said, "We're going to fix Bob's car." And we must have put like 4,000 pop rivets in that sucker. Just bam, 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 bam. He was mad. God, he was mad. I said, "Well, Brian sits in the back, and I might hit him when I fly back there." I said, "Oh, he can sit on the other side." Coffee makers finally showed up. We helped them set up, helped them make coffee. Stood outside, smoked cigarettes. Talked. Well, they talked. I tried to talk. Nobody could care less what I said. So we walked into the meeting. Bob pulled me back roughly, and he said, "If anybody accidentally calls on you in there, you tell them who you are and what you are, and you need to listen." I said, "I don't understand." He said, "Who you are is Mike, what you are is an alcoholic, and the next words out of your mouth are, I need to listen." And I said, "You mean you want me to pass?" He said, "No, you never pass in AA. You say, I need to listen." I said, "Why would I say that?" He said, "Because you need to listen." I said, "Suppose I have something important to say." He said, "We don't care. Anything out of your mouth's a lie." I wasn't allowed to talk. That's all I was allowed to say for the first 10 months I was in this program. I tried one time. I was 4 months sober, and you know how you are in 4 months sober. By God, I know everything. I had a damn sponsor telling me what the hell they're not going to do. Well, we're good. It's a step meeting we used to go to. And I'm being a bright guy and having all these degrees, letters behind my name. They had done the 3rd step the week before, the 4th step the week before, and the 6th step the next week. So I knew we were working on 5 this week. And I studied, folks. I studied like nobody's business. I read everything that's written on the 4th step. I read Augustine's Confessions, for God's sakes, so I could say something really profound. And I perfected it. I got it down to this nice little piece, take about 2 minutes to say, practiced it 3 or 4 times so I'd sound like I knew what I was doing. Got in the meeting. Comes my turn. I'm Mike. I'm an alcoholic. And as some of you know, I'm going to say priest, and that's as far as I got. And from across the table came the melodious voice of my sponsor. I won't say what he said because it's not very nice, but that's a lie. Just screamed it at me. And the entire room broke out in laughter. They thought that was just the funniest thing they'd ever heard in their lives. And I sort of slid down under the chair looking for a place in the pile of the carpet to hide. And on my way down, I said, "And I just need to listen." And they thought that was even funnier. And they say we don't laugh at the newcomer. We don't. We just laugh very near the newcomer is what we do. But he drugged me around. God bless him, he drugged me around. Every night. The meeting was over, that first meeting, and I got in the car, and he pulled out of the parking lot, and I slid into the back seat. And we went a tooling down the road. We went past my street, like, boom, and I go, Bob, I think you've missed the turn. No, we're going to Denny's. Denny's. I am personally acquainted with the head chef at Le Leon d'Or in the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. I can get a table there anytime I want to. I don't go to Denny's. I certainly don't go to Denny's with this tattooed guy and 4 of his tattooed friends in Alcoholics Anonymous to sit in the corner booth where there's all the windows, so if anybody knows me, they can drive past and see me. But that's where I went. 11 o'clock, we left Denny's and went home. We did that every night. Every night. Pick me up before the meeting. Make me go to these, get there early. Talk to me endlessly about stuff I couldn't care less about. Make me hang out with you people. I hated it. I hated it. Go to Denny's every night. I was on a first name basis with the waitstaff at Denny's, for God's sakes. One night we left. I couldn't figure out why. I thought, doesn't this guy have a family? And I thought, well, maybe I'm doing him a service by keeping him away from him, for God's sakes, because he's awful. It's the least I can do. One night we left Denny's at 10 or 11. We left early. Drove back to my house and got 2 blocks from my house. We drove past the liquor store. The guy was turning off the light, closing up. I knew why we went to Denny's every night. I knew why this man had not been home with his family one night in 4 months. And I turned and I looked at him with that look that pigeons give their sponsors. I know what you're doing, my God. And he turned and looked at me with that loving, kind sponsor look that we all get, and said, that's okay, Mike. I don't like you either. And he didn't. But he loved you drunk enough to do whatever it took. Because he knew I was the kind of drunk that if he dropped me off after the meeting, I'd double back and I'd be at that liquor store. And so he kept me out till it closed so I wouldn't get drunk. And he knew I didn't want to be here, and he knew I didn't like this program, and he knew I was lying about whether I was doing step work. And he knew that, because he knew the kind of drunk I was, because that's the kind of drunk he was. And he was willing to go through all the crap that I put him through in order to save another drunk's life. I hated him. I hated him. I stayed awake late at night thinking of ways to kill him slowly, publicly, and painfully. I didn't like y'all. I didn't like the meetings. I didn't like this program. I didn't. The book that was big. Oh God, the slogans. My God, it's like you died and went to Hallmark. Can't you people think? Can't you say anything original? No, you can't. You can't say anything original because people like us have original thoughts. We're in trouble. Anything comes out of my head is bad news. He told me once, he said, if you think it up all by yourself, if it's an original thought, I said, what's that? He said, if you haven't heard it from me, 3 people in AA with over 10 years sobriety or read it in the big book as an original thought. I said, yeah, so suppose I have an original thought. He said, if you have an original thought and you do the exact opposite, Mike, you got a 99% chance of doing the right thing. And I hated it. I tried to drink. I really did. I tried to drink. I was in Annapolis Mall one day, and my favorite bar was there. It was a little place called Yesteryears. It was just a wonderful pub. And I could slide in there in the afternoon. I'm sitting there, and I'm in the mall, and I'm thinking, well, you can go in there and have a couple of quick ones. And if you get a little buzz, you can go back to your office and sleep it off and come back. Nobody will know. As I'm heading into the door, and honest to God, I was closer to the door than I am to Tom. I hear, Father Mike! And I turn and look, and there are 2 people from Alcoholics Anonymous come through the door of the mall just as I'm getting ready to hit the bar, and they turn around. Hi, how you living? And they talked, and they talked, and they talked. And I'm thinking, go shopping, leave, so I can go get a drink, leave. And they wouldn't leave, and they wouldn't leave. And I finally said, listen, I got to go. I got an appointment, and I left. I took a plane. I had to go to a conference. And I know this a month ahead, and I'm saying, hey, a plane. 25,000 feet in the air. Nobody knows me. They serve drinks. Cocktail party. A ride. Sponsor drove me to the airport. Got my paper. We got to the gate. It used to be you could go to the gate. Everybody could go. And he drives me to the airport. And where they be, he says, "Did you pack a big book?" I said, "No, I didn't pack my big book. This is a business meeting." He says, "I didn't think so." Boom, out of a paper bag. There. So now I got my big book and my paper, and I get on the plane, and I sit down. And honest to God, in all my drinking careers, it never happened. I sat in the 2 seats there by the galley, and the liquor cart was right there with all the bottles. All I had to do was reach over and go, "Wonga." But I wouldn't do it because that's what an alcoholic would do. He'd steal the liquor. And I'd been practicing for 2 weeks on how to order a drink without sounding like an alcoholic. Well, if you order the drink like, "Give me a," they'll know. But if you do something casual, like you're reading and you look up and say, "Can I get you?" "Oh, yes, let me have a Tanqueray and tonic. I'll make it a double." It's very casual, like then they won't know you're an alcoholic. So I'm not going to steal the liquor. And we're going down the runway and the bottles are clinking together going, "Drink me, drink me, drink me first." And I'm saying, "Don't worry, fellas, we'll have time to get to all of them." The waitress comes down, the stewardess comes down, she gets to me, and she says, "Can I get you something?" And I go, should have ordered it quick. I went, because I had my paper in front of me. And she said, "Is that your book?" And she points to the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous sitting on the table. I went, "Yes, that's my book." And she said, "Oh, it's my book." And I said, "No, ma'am, it's my book." And she said, "No, it's my book." And I thought there was something the matter with her eye. I said, "No, ma'am, it's my book." And she said, "No, it's my book too. Are you a friend of Bill's?" And I didn't even get a chance to answer. And I went, and she said, "Oh, this is great. I can finish doing this, come back, and we can have a meeting." I don't want a meeting. I want a double Tanqueray and tonic. I've been on this thing for 2 weeks. Between God and Bob, I could not drink. So as a consequence, I'm 10 months sober. I've got no program. I got no steps. I got no God. I got nothing, and I got no booze. And I'm crazy because, see, I don't have a drinking problem. I have a sober problem. I don't have a drinking problem. I have a sober problem. I still have a sober problem. I'm fine when I'm drinking. There are lots of people who are not fine when I'm drinking, but I'm fine when I'm drinking. Drinking does for me what nothing else in the world can. And I haven't had a drink. And I'm 10 months sober. And I'm insane. I'm going to kill me. I'm going to drink or kill me or kill a large number of other people. I liked option 3 best. And now if you're here and you're here like I was here just to sort of pick up the white chip and get people off your back, don't ever do this. But at the Magathie 12 and 12 meeting, 10 and a half months sober, I did the worst thing I could do. I told my sponsor the truth. I'd laid out the whole sad, ridiculous, disgusting mess. And he looked at me and said, "Well, I guess life will just unfold as it unfolds. Isn't that wonderful?" And I snapped and I grabbed him by the shirt collar and I said, "You don't seem to understand. I'm going to kill somebody and you just moved to the top of the list." Not that he had very far to go. And he said, "Well, what do you want from me?" And I said, "Well, you're so damn smart. Why don't you tell me what to do?" And he said, "Why don't you join Alcoholics Anonymous?" And I said, "What the hell do you think I've been doing for the last 10 months? He said, "Visiting." And he was right. And I wish I could say I joined Alcoholics Anonymous, but I waited until about 2 weeks after my first anniversary. And I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning in the worst emotional pain I've ever been in my life. And I was crying, and I have no idea why. And I rolled out of bed, and I got on my knees, and I looked up at the ceiling, and I said, "Dear God, please help me." And for the first time, I heard the voice of God in my life. I've been a priest for 13 years, and I heard the voice of God in my life. And said, "Why don't you join Alcoholics Anonymous?" Who knew that Bob sounded like God or God sounded like God? I went downstairs, I opened up the big book. And I put Mike in the pages for the first time. 2 months later, Bob went to Florida for 4 months. He had accumulated a lot of vacation. He needed to take it, and he was building a house down there. And he made me get a new sponsor, and he picked 3 guys, and he said, you can pick one of those. So I picked the easiest, most laid back kind of, he was a California guy. He was real hip and laid back and all that. He became my sponsor, and in 35 minutes he turned into a rotten, mean SOB just like Bob. I don't know why. I just seem to bring that out in sponsors. But he took me through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous one more time, and this time I paid attention. And what he did was he taught me something. He taught me that all these previous times I had been trying to fit AA into my life, and those parts of AA that didn't work, I just trimmed off. And what we did this time is we fit my life into AA, and those parts that didn't work, we had to trim off. And he taught me in the first step that I have a disease of perception, and that means that the world is like this and my mind's like this. And when I drink, I take the world and I go, and everything matches up and I'm happy. And he suggested that what we were going to do from now on was take my mind and go like this. And we were going to do that with steps and meetings and the fellowship and the principles and all, and God. The problem is that my mind is like a rubber band and it keeps going boing, so I have to show up again tomorrow night. So you can fix it and put it back. I found a God of my understanding I didn't know about. I had a degree in God. I worked for God, for heaven's sakes. I knew a lot about God. I didn't have a relationship with a God that was of any use to me. He taught me about a God I could have a relationship with, and I helped develop one. He taught me that if I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of a God of my understanding, that we had a way that I could do that. And he pointed out that steps 4 through 12 is how a drunk turns their will and their life over to the care of God. Other people do it other ways. You know, they go on retreats, they wind up at church, they have spiritual experiences and burning bushes and speak in tongues and all the rest of that. Drunks do 4 through 12. That's how we get to God. Because what he taught me was that the fellowship convinces me I need the steps because I'm crazy. And the steps clear a pathway to God so that God can alleviate my alcoholism. See, I didn't know that. I had no idea. I thought somehow I could fix this all by myself. Or maybe I could fix this with one of the 50 psychiatrists I went to, none of whom correctly diagnosed my alcoholism as a Valium deficiency until I got to the last one. You know, that's what I thought. And what he told me was I had an incurable disease. I had a mind that couldn't live with alcohol and a body that couldn't live with alcohol and a mind that couldn't live without it. Consequently, I was screwed. But I had a God of my understanding that could alleviate my alcoholism. It's what's said in the Baltimore Prologue, which isn't read very much anymore. It says, we do not cure or alleviate alcoholism, believing that rests with God. What we do is we teach you how to find God. I made a list of all my character defects, which was lots of fun, and then told things to a plumber that I wouldn't tell a $200 psychiatrist, for God's sakes. You know, I did a 6th step, which is that's, you know, they say this is the separates the men from the boys, and it really is, because none of us want to get rid of our character defects. I don't want to get rid of my character defects. You know, I tell you what, it's like, you know that place in your mother's house, that closet with the real high shelf where she puts the stuff that she doesn't want anybody to see, but she might need sometime? That's where I want my character defects. You know, out of the way, out of sight, don't embarrass me. Just, but if I need them, I know where to get them. You know, because the real problem is, suppose I have God take away my anger. And I'm driving in Charlotte like I was today, and some idiot cuts me off like he did today, and I reach for my anger so I can pull up beside him, give him the finger, and cuss him out, and it's not there. And I go, and what am I supposed to do? I mean, just let him go? My God in heaven above. You know, suppose I get an enormous tax bill. You know, and I got to do this honesty thing. You know, and I'm just going to have to pay the government the money, for God's sakes. I don't want my character defects gone, but if I'm going to have any peace in my life, they've got to be out of there. And I can't get rid of them myself. You know, I have no more power to get rid of character defects than I did to quit drinking. You know, I used to think, well, I'll figure out what they were and then I'll fix them. Oh, you know, I'll pray and I'll ask God to humbly remove my character defects. And I'll pray that stupid prayer with that big loophole. You know that big loophole? Take away every defect of character that stands in the way of my usefulness to God and my fellows. God told me once, he said, that means that the next morning when you wake up and you still got them, they're gifts from God. Figure out how to use them. That's tough to get your head around. My character defects are gifts to God, and they'll be useful to you, to God, or to your fellows. I said, how's that happening? He said, well, some days some people serve as examples, and other days they serve as a warning. Maybe that's what happens. And did 8 and 9, said I'm sorry to all these people who deserve twice what I did to them. And continued to do 10, 11, and 12. And I got to 12, and he told me to go back to 1. He said, we don't have a 13th step in AA, which I had heard about and was real disappointed we didn't have one. And he said, you get to go back to 1 again. And I keep doing that. They told me when I got here, when somebody goes out, ask them what step they were working on. And I did, and they were saying, well, I wasn't working on any steps. You ask me today what step I'm working on, I'll tell you what step I'm working on, because I don't want to get drunk. I'm going to do real quick what I'm like today. I'm nothing like I was when I got here. And people who knew me when I got here will testify to that. I was with my children and over Thanksgiving, and I was there for an extended period of time. It came time to go to a AA meeting. And I announced that I was going to go to an AA meeting, and one of my daughters-in-law looked at me and said, did you really have to go to a meeting? And all my sons immediately said, let him go, let him go, let him go. It's much better when he goes to the meeting. I've had days when my 5-year-old, who was a year old when I got sober, I came home and he said, are you going to a meeting tonight? And I said, no, I'm going to stay home and spend some time with you. And he said, I think you need to go to a meeting. I'll be fine here with the babysitter. You go to the meeting. You're not in good shape, So I keep doing that. And what I've gotten is that, my family's been restored to me. Thank God. My kids all talk to me. I get to play with my grandkids. They think I'm really neat. They've never seen me drunk. We just sit around the Thanksgiving table and talk about when I passed out in the mashed potatoes, and everybody laughs. It used to be you'd say, you remember when you passed out in mashed potatoes and ruined it? And now we laugh about it because we know there's a pretty good chance that's not going to happen again. And it's because of you people in this program. I'm going to tell you one quick story. Again, been given a God of my understanding. I've given the opportunity to hear the voice of God. I hear the voice of God on a daily basis. I'm dead serious. God speaks to me on a daily basis. He can speak to you. All you have to do is show up at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and listen very carefully, because you'll hear the voice of God talking to you. My experience is particularly listen to the people you don't like. The guy over there who you know is not going to get sober and just makes you furious every time he opens his mouth. He's the one God chooses to deliver the message. Because I hear the voice of God, and sometimes it sounds like Steve, and sometimes it sounds like Tom or Wallace, or Michelle or Kevin or Ben. But it's the voice of God talking to me. And I get to hear that anytime. That's wonderful. I've been given peace in my life. I've been given happiness. I've been joy. I've been given respect to my peers and my profession. It's all come to me. Most importantly, what's come to me is a peace. Today, I get up in the morning and I say some prayers. And the last thing I get to say is, we got this. What I never knew was that when I wanted to say, I got this, I can't. But with you all and God and me, we got this regardless of what happens. If you're new tonight, if for no other reason, don't take a drink so you can hang around the people in this room. Because the greatest gift I've gotten from sobriety, hands down, is an opportunity and the privilege to hang out with people in Alcoholics Anonymous, because they are the best people in the world. My father was an active alcoholic. He came to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous for about 42 years. The longest he was sober was 2 years and 10 months. When he died, we were at his funeral, and the door opened, and three guys who Tom knows and I've known for a long time from Myrtle Beach. One was George I., who was his sponsor, and one was John G., and the other was Bill W., and they were his running buddies. And they walked into the funeral. My father was drunk the night before he died. The last thing he said to my mother was, "I guess I have to go back to AA." And the prospect was so daunting, he dropped over dead at the kitchen table right there. He hadn't been in an AA meeting in probably 2 months, and he'd been drunk for 2 months. And there was George, and there was John, and there was Bill. And behind them were a line of people who I never met before. I'm a year sober, and I'm standing by the book, and they come up, and I greet George and John and Bill warmly because I know them. I hung out with them, and when Daddy was in one of his get sober periods, they were around the house a lot, and we did stuff together. And I greeted them and thanked them for coming and told them that Mama would be very happy that they were there. And then behind them, these people came, and they'd sign the book, and they'd shake my hand, and they'd say, "I'm so-and-so, and I'm a member of the Seaside group of Alcoholics Anonymous," which was his home group when he was trying to get sober. And they would either say, "I knew your father," or "I saw your father at meetings," or "I didn't get the chance to meet your father, but I'm sorry he's dead," and boom, boom, boom. And there must have been 30 of them. So I trot back in the room afterwards, and I go over, and George and John and Bill are sitting there, and I said, "What are all these guys from Seaside Group doing here?" And I got a year sober, so I know everything. And John turns to me, and I'm sober in Annapolis at this point in time. He says, "I don't know how y'all do it up north, but down here, we bury our own." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "He was a member of our home group." I said, "He wasn't a member of any home group. He was drunk the night before he died." And I've never seen John that mad, and I've never seen John mad, and fire shot out of his eye. And he's a little short guy, he's shorter than me, and I'm not tall. And he's a little short guy, and he starts sticking his finger up my nose, like, short sponsors and people with long time. And he says, "Listen, buddy, we have a third tradition in this program. The only requirement's a desire to stop drinking. And your father had that desire. He wouldn't get kept coming back. Doesn't mean just because he didn't get it, didn't mean he's not a good home group member. And we bury our own here, buddy." And I said, "I'm sorry." These are the finest people in the world. No other group of people in the whole wide world do that. If there's no other reason you don't take a drink today, don't take a drink so you can come back and hang out with these folks, because they will do miracles in your life. Always end with the same joke, and I'm sorry I'm running over. 2 men drinking in a bar in Alaska. One's a very religious man, one's an atheist. The atheist says to the very religious man, "I don't believe in your God." Very religious man says, "Why not?" Atheist says, "I gave your God a chance to prove himself, and he failed." Very religious man said, "How'd you do that?" He said, "Well, about 3 months ago, I was stuck 150 miles north of town in a blinding snow blizzard, and I knew I couldn't get help, I'd die. And I knelt down in the snow, and I looked up at the sky and said, 'Dear God, please help me.'" Very religious man looked at the atheist and said, "Well, you certainly must believe you're here." Atheist said, "No, some damned Eskimo came along and showed me the way back to town." 28 years ago, I was stuck in a blinding snow blizzard 150 miles north of town, and God sent an Eskimo by the name of Bob T. to show me the way back to town. Numerous times in the last 28 years, I've been stuck in that same snow blizzard, that same 150 miles north of town, and God's always sent an Eskimo to drag me back to town and put my butt in the seat in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous so it would be okay and so we could get it. If there's any trouble that you have in your life tonight, I pray to God that you have an Eskimo come. Look out for a guy who says, "Get in the car." I believe in the power of prayer. Tonight when I kneel down at my bedside, I will ask the God of my understanding if each and every one of you can have 24 more hours of this life. If you have a God of your understanding, if you happen to be in contact with that God anytime in the near future, and if you happen to remember it, I would deeply, deeply appreciate it if you ask the God of your understanding if I can have 24 more hours of this life, because I absolutely love it. I thank you all very much for 12-stepping me one more time this evening, and have a very Merry Christmas.